that is fundamentally anti-science, fundamentally against universalism. It sure as hell is not helpful in making progress. Can't have a regressive thinking way like that and expect to make progress. In the vein of things that really don't need to be the focus of NSF, is this piece the College Fix came up with. I tracked down the article in question. Thank you to the College Fix for the links appropriately. And I wanted to bring this up because stuff like this undermines a lot of things in science. It actually doesn't help a damn thing. Science is based with the normative principle of universalism, and one of the biggest things in that doesn't matter race or sex. It matters what your idea is. It's amazing. It's amazing how that simple thing that gets forgotten that is actually very progressive compared to the very regressive things that I noticed were funded under this grant by NSF. And it reminds me of a whole lot of certain things lately. And if you saw and you follow me on Twitter, you know I commented on this article. As it's related to science funding and it's related to STEM because it's particularly about physicists, as you can tell from the title here. So we'll read this, and then I do want to flip over to the actual article that prompted this article in the College Fix, as well as the NSF award grant information, because as always, you can find these things because there's actually more there. White cis male physicists with good intentions aren't doing enough to fight racism and sexism from which they benefit, argued two education researchers in a recently published article in the International Journal of STEM Education. Co-principal investigators Miss Melissa Dancy of Western Michigan University and I don't quite know how to pronounce that. April Hodari. I do not know how to pronounce that. Of Eureka Scientific Inc. were able to determine their findings in part thanks to a nearly $300,000 grant from the National Science Foundation. $300,000 of taxpayer money wasted. One of the reasons I'm so nitpicky on the good use of scientific dollars, good use being, relevant questions that will actually make a difference and not premise your own ideology, which is precisely what this thing does. Yeah, because you are spending, let us be honest with this, a lot of the money to do scientific research comes from federal government agencies, including the National Science Foundation. Not all, but quite a significant chunk of it. So this kind of thing in here is a disaster. I did read through part of the article. This is an absolute disaster. And one of the things, you might see it on the screen, but as I mentioned, because the principle of universalism matters so much, in this case, I want to make a point that they use the idiotic notions of positionality statements in their articles. I never read those. Those don't matter worth a damn with respect to the ideas of the article. They don't matter worth a damn at all. So I never read them. Never when I do anything with peer review, never when I do any of these kinds of reviews, never. Because they are irrelevant to the ideas in the article. And so I have no idea who these people are. And I'm going to keep it that way because that's not what's important. It's dismantling the ideas that is important here. Let's see. The pair and their team interviewed 27. Wildly small sample size, by the way. And it's also graduate students. It's graduate students and faculty. Okay. Wildly small sample size. Interviewed 27 self-identified white male graduate students and faculty from 15 different physics departments across the United States, all of whom claimed to be knowledgeable about equity-related issues and generally believed in advancing equity-related causes. Interview questions centered on the experiences of those physicists acknowledging, discussing, and confronting sexism and racism, especially in their own classrooms, labs, departments, and schools. Questions also honed in on the physicist's thoughts on recent studies reportedly demonstrating inequity and discrimination in STEM. The authors then use a lens of critical discourse. If you're seeing something like that, think critical theory and postmodernism right away, which, as I've said many times and argued in other videos on this channel, is fundamentally anti-science. To better understand the relation, and hence why it shouldn't be funded by the National Science Foundation, but anyway, to better understand the relationship between the beliefs and actions of white male physicists and an epistemology of ignorance framing. Interesting. They focused their analysis, they wrote, on understanding how it is these otherwise highly intelligent and successful physicists maintain high levels of ignorance of sexism, racism, and their own privilege. I'm reminded of what Anna told me in the side chat Saturday, actually. You know, how they, if you dissent or disagree, well, you got to be missing something if you disagree. If you disagree, and this isn't even about disagreement, it's people who say, yeah, I see this, I'm going to help, I'm going to make things better, but yet they don't seem to be doing enough, according to the authors. Anyway, they added that what they found was, quote, these men, despite professing pro-equity beliefs, pervasively engage in patterns of thought, speech, and action that work to uphold white and male supremacy in physics while justifying their own personal inaction. Question: what is white and male supremacy and these kinds of things? I'm going to imagine it's not what most people would hear when they think of those things. It's probably such things as, oh, I don't know, adherence to scientific method and rational thinking? I don't know, but that would be my guess. Based on the information provided in the project outcomes report for the general public at the bottom of the award. Okay, pause a moment. Now I will make a thing for those of you who don't know. One of the things that is typically a requirement for any group that receives funding from the federal government is you must provide reporting on projects. And it's true for a lot of different agencies that do funding of scientific research. You have to provide interim reports on your activities in the grant. You have to provide final reports. I guess NSF refers to their final reports as project outcomes reports. Other agencies, it's just the final report. All of those things must be publicly accessible. In the case of the project outcomes report, NSF just puts them straight onto the grant thing, and I'll show you that in a second. But FYI, if it received money, if somebody received money from the federal government to do a research grant, there's got to be some reporting trail somewhere. Just FYI. And it's usually got to be tied to the grant number specifically. So if you see the grant number in a paper, keep it in mind because you can go back through and find the trail of reports. Let's see. At the bottom, it would appear this was the only publication to come out of the work by the 2017 grant. This is an old grant. Here it is, actually. Let's see. Division of Undergraduate Education. What do physicists from majority groups know and believe about race and gender? Oh boy. So you can always find a lot of information here. You know, it may have been awarded. Sometimes you get amendments to grants where you just need to change and tweak budgets and things like that. So that's what a lot of these are, is just amendments about that. The actual award number, it's a standard grant. This is, the line here is the program manager for who at NSF oversaw the grant. Investigators involved, as you can see here. This is interesting. It actually changed around a few people a few times. That's really interesting. But it's not necessarily all that often that you see that. That's the only reason I say that. It doesn't mean anything good or bad in this case. It just changes. Total intended award amount, total awarded to date, $299,209. And yes, you do have to be quite precise with grant budgeting, so you will see these very precise numbers. So yeah, it officially ended, or at least it should have officially ended. The fact that it still says estimated here leaves me a question mark. Although not entirely impossible. I will say, at least in different agencies, one of the things that happened, of course, during COVID is you couldn't spend out your travel dollars if you had a budget, and sometimes it's easier to wait and be able to spend it. So one of the things that you'll find happen with some of these grants is you'll have what's called a no-cost extension, whereby you're basically saying, I'm not quite done yet. Can you give me a little bit more time to finish it? I'm not going to spend any more money. I just need more time. That's basically what it is with those. So if I know the guys are wondering, the grant was awarded in 2017. It supposedly ended in 2021. But that could have been what happened, is they asked for a couple of no-cost extensions, particularly if they were doing interviews. If they weren't originally intending to do them over Zoom, for example, it's a distinct possibility that they had to push out the end date because they couldn't get everybody together in person for whatever reason with the things of agencies and what have you. That's totally fair and understandable reason why there might be something like that going on. But I digress. These are some of the internal workings that sometimes you just don't hear about. So yeah, sponsor congressional district, all that kind of stuff. This down here is the abstract of the grant itself. This project will address the significant need to increase diversity in physics by developing a robust understanding of majority populations' beliefs, knowledge, and attitudes toward the marginalization of white women and people of color. I'm going to come back to that because if you saw my comment on Twitter, you know why this kind of stuff ticks me off. Most physicists in the United States are white men, which is the result of many factors, including unnecessary barriers that unfairly impede the success of white women and people of color. Increasing diversity in physics both improves the quality of physics research and is a matter of justice. Both of those statements should have justification. This is an abstract, so you don't need citations there, but I sure as hell hope it was in the proposal. This project is significant in its departure from previous work, which has generally focused on those from underrepresented minority groups by focusing on white men who constitute an overrepresented majority of physicists. Wow. Through interviews with 120 white male physics students and professors, this project will describe the majority group's understanding of race and gender-based marginalization in physics. This information will be important for designing programs that productively involve both minority and majority populations to diversify physics. Three goals of the project are to, 1, document and understand majority populations' knowledge and beliefs about and experience with race and gender-based inequities in physics, develop theories about the logic that underlie the majority population's understanding of race, gender, and marginalization in physics, and use these theories to identify avenues for change. To achieve these goals, 120... Really? They never made it. Wow. They're like... Yeah, between 4 and... They got a fourth to a fifth of what they were trying to get when they actually... Because they only interviewed 27 in the study. Interesting. They never made it to their target, and even 120 is really dang small. Consider there is actually a significant amount of physics majors out there. To achieve these goals, or at least I think so. I guess the fair question is how much is 120? What is the percentage there? 120 to the number of students. That I don't know, so I may be wrong on that one. That's a fair observation. To achieve these goals, 120 self-identified white male physics students and faculty at 5 research universities will be interviewed about race and gender in physics. Interview data will be analyzed using a framework that describes marginalization of 4 dimensions: ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. By filling the gap in knowledge about the majority group's views about race and gender, this project will advance the understanding of barriers to success faced by people from minority groups in physics. Appropriate disclaimer courtesy of the NSF. The project outcomes report for the general public is displayed verbatim as submitted by the principal investigator for this award. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this report are those of the PI and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. NSF has not approved or endorsed its content. Yeah, you put your disclaimer up front, at least. Though I gotta say, I don't know what the hell is wrong with the formatting crew there. I don't even want to read this particular part of it because I'm just like, what the hell did you do with the formatting? Oh, goodness. So let's go back here to the College Fix article. College Fix reached out via email to Dancy, who is listed on the paper as the principal author and principal investigator, and corresponding author, to get a better understanding of how money from the grant was spent and whether there were other studies associated with and ultimately funded through the grant. However, the Fix did not receive a reply. Good on the College Fix for reaching out and asking the question. I do suspect that this is the article in question. It was just published. I suspect, given the notion here where it says estimated, because usually when it's closed, that estimated number goes away. So speculation. This is speculation on my part that they are not necessarily done on that grant. Let's put it that way. That's the best that I can speculate, but I have no idea for sure. So take it for what it is. I'm taking a guess. According to the article, the primary means by which these white male physicists illustrate their inaction include asserting that inequity is something physically distant from them, blaming inequity on larger societal or cultural factors over which they have no such control as K-12 education, or women choosing motherhood over physics careers. In other words, this bugs me that they think of this as a problem, because recognizing that societal interactions are actually a hell of a lot more nuanced than just everything's caused by discrimination, which brings about the disparity fallacy. Being that any disparity is caused by discrimination, that is the disparity fallacy, a la Coleman Hughes. It's a variation of the single cause logical fallacy. But, yeah. I'm sorry, you're forgetting there's a lot more nuanced things going on here, that there's actually more to it than just discrimination. That is one of the reasons why I find this postmodern stuff to be so anti-scientific. It does not actually consider looking for the truth at all in these kinds of things, and considering that there are probably a lot of other things going on. But anyway, and appealing to their own discomfort with or inadequacy in directly addressing racism and sexism. Collectively, the authors wrote, these patterns serve to maintain ignorance of the sexism and racism around them. There you go is there's a note right there. Remember the fundamental first tenet of critical race theory, and a lot of the critical theories as X thing is everywhere and is endemic in society, and therefore you got to see it everywhere. Maybe they should realize that a lot of people don't necessarily share that view, that it's absolutely everywhere, and are right to not share that view, to be honest. It's not based on truth, on a lot of truthfulness to it. Let's see. According to the authors, it would be more productive for these white male physicists to acknowledge discrimination is occurring all around them in their professional environment, and acknowledge that it is driving women and minorities out of the field. Look, I do want to make a point. This is not to say that it hasn't happened. I have known folks who, senior to me, have had horrible things happen. Anna and I, when we talked about this, she admitted that, yeah, it happened to her. That there were lots of nasty things, and there were a lot of things used to keep women and women in different minority groups out of STEM fields. That has happened. That has happened in history, and it's horrible. There's a point that I want to make here at the end, and it goes back to what I tweeted about, because, again, first off, what I said before, many societal things, societal cultural nuances and what have you that you're utterly forgetting about. There's more than one reason why a person may not choose a physics career, and there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of things that affect a person and helps them decide what they're going to do with their life. To rectify these problems, the authors state, people of privilege need to be targeted for interventions to help them better understand how their thoughts and actions lead to their complicity in inequity and learn ways to directly and indirectly confront oppression. Very one-sided way of thinking about it. You have to think the way we do, is what I get out of that, to be honest. It's extremely creepy. Very extremely creepy. And shall we make a point? It's exclusive of diverse viewpoints. We'll make that point there. Just I'll leave it. Dancy and Hodari also suggest such individuals need to be held accountable professionally for ignorance and inaction on equity issues. Okay, so in other words, you don't. That goes to the things that would bring up lawsuits from FIRE and others at that point. All right. Here's what I want to say about. Here's the thing. I mentioned this in my tweet, and I do want to come back to it. Ending racism requires white people to change. Ending sexism requires men to change, the authors wrote. The progressive white men we interviewed are essential to change. They have the interest and motivation to act for change and the power to have an impact. Yet they maintain significant ignorance of inequity and view themselves as helpless, despite occupying more powerful positions. I've said this several times. And those of you who watch this channel know full well that I work in climate. Climate is very physics heavy. So while not a physicist, there are certainly things that I can say related to this. Relatively early, well, not really, not quite so early anymore necessarily, but in my career, as I have said many times, publicly, privately, at this point, I have said it many, many, many times. This is anecdotal, but it does fit for why some of these things tick people off to the point that they won't listen anymore to some of the things like what the authors are saying. Never in my career had I ever had to deal with sexism. I never had a problem. Never in grad school, never in undergrad. Not to say that others didn't. I never did. And I know a lot of other folks who never did. But here's the rub with that. Where I started having to deal with sexist remarks and comments was precisely because of folks who had their heads so buried into DEI, were so thinking of people as members of groups, that they did not realize what they were saying to me was remarkably sexist. And potentially remarkably racist, because there's an assumption here with this ending racism requires white people to change. There's an assumption there that only white people are the only ones that can be racist. That is a critical theory assumption for sure. Or at least it seems that's the assumption that's made. I'll be charitable with that. It seems that's the assumption that is made. But that is straight out of some of the fundamental literature with critical theory. But I never had a problem. I never experienced any of that in my career until I had to deal with the folks who had their heads so buried in DEI that they made that remark to me, and often made sexist remarks to me. And often it is the commentary. Well, you know how it is as a woman in STEM. What the hell are you talking about? I don't have the same experiences as you. This is the unfortunate problem with group mentality. This group mentality that undermines universalism. And again, what makes this critical theory stuff utterly anti-scientific is that it makes presumptions that you experience things, or you have thoughts or feelings or what have you, or you should, because one of the things was like internalized whatnot, based upon your demographic characteristics. Is that the right thing here to promote in terms of science? And if you're, I'm not at all denying that racism and sexism exists. I just explained it for myself. But here's the thing. If you really wanted such things to end, might be really hard to do because of human nature. But if human nature can be really shitty, just a point there. But if you really want such things to end, why are you focusing on one single group? Or, in this case, two single groups, because you got white people and you got men. Because what are you assuming with that? I mean, you're focusing on one single group and you're not presuming that it's possible for others to exhibit such nasty behavior, such really bad things. Presuming that all this stuff is everywhere and it's all certain groups' fault and not others. That is, I fail to see how continuing the regressive notions of the past that, yeah, happen in science, happen in every discipline, happen just about every discipline there was and is. I fail to see how engaging in that regressive thinking of the past, where you think of engage in the same stereotypes, engage in stereotyping people and creating new stereotypes of people. How is that going to address things and problems that were created by the same regressive thinking? Just because you're dressing it up now and saying it's for equity doesn't mean it's any better. It's still regressive thinking. It's not progressive in the slightest. And thinking about people in terms of groups, like I said, I never speak positionality statements. I never read them. I never look at them. I never look up what an author even looks like. I don't really give a damn. That doesn't matter. But going at it that way, and particularly teaching the next generation of STEM students that they should look at it that way, undermines STEM immensely, undermines science immensely, because you're teaching people that the demographic characteristics matter more than the individual's thoughts and ability and ideas, and the ability, of course, to test and try them over and over again. That is fundamentally anti-science, fundamentally against universalism. It sure as hell is not helpful in making progress. Can't have a regressive thinking way like that and expect to make progress. I'll just leave this up here because I'll of course have this linked in the description, but I encourage you to go to go find it, because this is utterly unhelpful. That's all I gotta say on that front. I did skim through it earlier, but it's decently summarized by the College Fix article. I may come back and revisit this to add a few more thoughts to the article itself. But until next time, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everyone.